Hi, George Devos here with Precision Pipe Repair. Thought I'd make a quick video to address something that I have seen for 40 years on pipes. And between going to shows, seeing thousands of them, and working on repairs myself, it seems to be the most common shortcoming or shortfall of pipes made by pretty much anybody today. The Danes have figured this out, the top-level American carvers have figured this out, but the mid-level and starter guys, not so much. And the two problems are these. Where you see the red here is material that should be removed but is not. And that's typically because people are forming the bite zone of their stem. This is a side view of a stem, by the way. They're typically forming the bite zone of the stem through either using a vertical belt sander or they're using the shoe shine method with strips of paper. And either of those, you end up with a little more material there than you want. It's very difficult to angle in and get a sharp crease. Then the problem is, once you've got the sharp crease, how do you put a luster on it? How do you shine that so that you don't have a little dull line behind the crease? And I'll show you how to do both of those things. Now the importance of that is kind of interesting in that it really has no functional value, but the collectors, the high-grade collectors, immediately look to the work output of a carver and determine it's used as like a channel marker of quality for the pipe. You'll, as a carver yourself, you have a lot of difficulty placing your work with the high-end marketers of artisan pipes if you've got the problems I just described with the button. It's one of the first things they look at because it's so rarely done properly. And the other problem is viewing a pipe from the bowl end outward. This black arch here is the face of the button, the rear of the button. And that typically, or too often, is lopsided. And I can usually tell if a carver is right-handed or left-handed by how this will be fatter on one side and lower on the other, and if you flip the pipe over, it'll be the same thing, so that you end up with a kind of an egg shape going on there. And I'll show you as in a demo here in a minute how I control both this and this. Now there's only two specialty tools that are necessary. One of them is a dead face file called a nut seating file, and you'll see that in the demonstration here in a minute. You can get that from Stuart McDonald, a supplier of materials and tools to the guitar making trade. It's called a nut seating file. You want the 3/16 inch thick one. And another you can make yourself, and it's to have some buffing wheels that have been deliberately made into stringy, shaggy, kind of like starfish looking devices here. You do that with a standard rake. You rake them heavily, but then don't trim the strings. You want the strings, and the reason for that is when you're actually buffing the stem, pretend for the moment that this is a top of a pipe stem and this is the button here. This would be the crease of the button. The strings will actually gather or funnel into the crack or into the crease behind the button while it's spinning. And it will shine like a beast without dulling this top edge or cutting any grooves anywhere else in the stem. Now people try little Dremel tool felt bob tips, and they get in there and all that'll do is melt. Or sometimes they'll take buffing compound on a piece of yarn like your grandmother would knit a sweater from, and they try to string that through there. That'll just cut a groove. Don't try those methods, they don't work. But a stringy standard cotton muslin buffer that's left with the floppy strings will do the trick. You just hold the stem at a 45-degree angle to the buffer and kind of force the strings to gather in the crease, and it'll shine like mad. And that's it, we're off to the shop. Alrighty, time to begin. Using a cast stem here, so-called molded stem. It's got a big chunky button. Everything that you're going to see applies to a rod stock stem as well. And the first thing you want to do is use a pillar file to square the crease behind the button, and in order to keep it from digging in and creating a groove where you don't want it, take a single wrap of Scotch tape slightly closer to the button than the width of the file you're going to use. This is a number 1. Alrighty, off we go. And you need to conform. This is a dead edge file so that the side of it doesn't cut, only the flat faces cut. And you keep the pressure slightly heavier on the down side, but not extremely so. It's a fairly delicate operation, but you arch this thing. Remember constantly to keep, you don't want to put a flat spot in there, so you keep on arching over the top. And you just keep going until you're done, and you'll know that when you look at it. Alrighty, and if you look at the face of the button, you'll notice that a little step began to form. And there's the next step that step meaning a little ledge has begun to form there, and we need to cut that away. The next tool is the exact opposite of the previous one. It's also a file, but this one has dead faces and live edges. And you use it this way. Also, the tape is still there to keep a cut from appearing halfway up the face of this stem. And this has got a coarse edge and a fine edge. Naturally, you start with the coarse one and remove all the material that you want to remove. Every stroke, you've got to keep in mind the arch or the radius of the bite zone. The minute you start going straight in, you're going to create ledges in the opposite direction of what the previous file created. So there's some finesse here. Flip it over, continue with the fine cut. And a little more. Okay, the next step is we're going to remove the sanding marks that are going sideways on the stem. We want all the scratches that when the thing is finally sanded and ready to be buffed, you want all the scratches to be moving the length of the stem so that they're at right angles to the direction we're going to buff. We'll talk more about that later. In the meantime, you're going to be sanding this, and the best way to do that I've found is using a foam nail board, which is found in any drugstore. The reason for the black is I've squared this edge against a sanding disc. They're not quite flat when you buy them, so just give it a touch on a sanding disc and they'll flatten right out. So take a piece of paper that you've cut with a pair of scissors to about twice or 2.5 times the width of this stick. Fold it to find the bend point, crease it, wrap it back around like so. And this is wet or dry sandpaper, so have some water handy. Wet the surface and begin to sand. Wet sanding serves several purposes, one of which is it cuts way down on the dust that you're breathing while you're working. Another is that the sandpaper itself does not load up or varnish, so that you don't need to change it, but a fraction as often as if you use it dry. It's altogether a better way to go. Alright, we're going to take this up through the grades, as they call it. I'm using 400 grit at the moment, and we're just going to keep going until we're up to 1,000 or so. Alrighty, we've gone up through the grades from 400 or so up to 1,000, and the face of the button is now dead flat and very clean. There's a sharp line between that and the bite zone, and the radius of the bite zone is perfectly even. The next step is to shape the button to conform to the arch of the bite zone.